book, a lie, in a world that changed forever. Imagine living in a world where a single book could turn your neighbor, your friend, and even your own family against you. Hey, welcome back. This is my new podcast series, Echoes of Deception. And for those of you who haven't found my storytelling channel yet, it's on YouTube and it's called the Geezerville Chronicles. In one of my playlists, you'll find podcasts, and in the podcast area, just click on Echoes of Deception and you can catch up on all the latest episodes. So that's all for now, and let's begin, because storytelling is one of my favorite things ever. Hey, welcome. This is episode 7, and I'm Gary Watson, the Geezer, and this is Geezerville. Now, before we get started, I'm going to have to take you back in time a little bit to episode 4. And in episode 4, we looked at how Helena Scheuberin stood up to Heinrich Kramer, and she did it in public, and she defied him, and she even encouraged others in her community not to attend his sermons, and not even to go to church, which in essence bordered on heresy, which was a crime punishable by death. Now, I left you with a question in that episode. The question is, what does it take for someone to defy power? Courage? If courage is the key, where does that come from? Is it something you're born with? Well, in this episode, we're going to begin to explore that and try to determine why one person kneels and the other stands in the face of power that's used against them. This episode is going to, as you well know, if you look and if you happen to see episode 4, the two women I chose were Coretta Scott King and Cassidy Hutchinson. And I alluded to the fact that Helena's stance back in 1487 echoed forward to these two women. So we're going to examine that now. So let's dive in. I'm going to take you back to 1956. January 30th to be exact. We're in Montgomery, Alabama, and it's during a time when skin color meant you had to ride in the colored section of a bus. At that time, Dr. King, Martin Luther King, was elected at age 26 by a local group of black leaders to lead a protest. And that protest was sparked by the fact that Rosa Parks was arrested, not for sitting in the white section of the bus, and this is important, but for refusing to give up her seat in the black section when ordered to move for whites. By January 30th, we're 7 weeks into what would become the Montgomery bus boycott. At that time, Coretta was home with her 10-year-old daughter, Yolanda, and a bomb explodes on their front porch. The house shakes, the smoke rises, but mother and child survive. But in this moment of violence, it was Coretta's resolve that held the line. They were terrified because, and even their fathers both fathers for Coretta and Martin had come to town, and they begged Martin to leave Montgomery, or at least send Coretta and Yolanda away. But Coretta stood firm. She later recalled, "Everyone seemed frightened, and I realized how important it was for me to stand by my husband." And the next morning, Martin said plainly, "Coretta, you've been a real soldier. You are the only one who stood with me." So now I ask the question, what if she hadn't? What if fear had made her flinch? The movement might have faltered, the boycott might have ended, and history might have turned a different corner. But it didn't, because Coretta stayed. And why? Well, remember when Helena defied Kramer in 1485? She didn't just reject Kramer's sermon. She rejected the narrative. And Helena was not black and not the usual target. She was educated, wealthy, married, and utterly unwilling to grovel. She spat in Kramer's face in public and said, "Fie on you, you bad monk. May the falling of evil take you." And that wasn't just defiance. It was heresy to the power structure of the day. And it wasn't long before Helena and 6 others were accused of witchcraft. And this is important and merits attention. Rosa, Coretta, and Helena stood firm against community power, the status quo, and the government. What makes a person do that? What do you think? I'd love to hear your perspective, and I'm sure other listeners would as well. Coretta had been urged by her family, her friends, even some within the church to leave. Go north, take the child. Let Martin leave without endangering your family, they said to her. But she stayed. She had been a musician, a scholar, but that night she became something more, a pillar for a movement. Martin later testified that it was Coretta's strength that carried him through that night, and her resolve gave him the courage to continue. But was it Coretta's resolve? Or is there more to this story? Let's fast forward and ask, what about Cassidy Jacqueline Hutchinson? It's now June 28th, 2022. On this day, the United States Congress was conducting an investigation into the January 6, 2020 insurrection against the government of the United States. And they call forth a special surprise witness on that day. It's a young lady that's only 25 years old and yet very accomplished. She is, at that time, the former aide to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who was President Donald Trump's right-hand man. So she's called in front of the committee and in the presence of millions of viewers to testify. And she does something no other seasoned politician would dare. She tells the truth. On that day, Hutchinson testifies that then President Trump knew his supporters were armed just prior to the insurrection. She reveals that he wanted security removed so that those protesters could march to the Capitol. She shared how he lunged at a Secret Service agent when told that he couldn't go himself. Her words that day reshape the public understanding of what January 6th was about, not as a chaotic protest, but as a premeditated attempt to subvert democracy. And it cost her. She lost mentors, she lost friends, she received threats, and at one point she had to move from her home and live in isolation. But like Helena and like Coretta, she refused to be silenced. I have nothing to hide, I have nothing to gain, and I have everything to lose, she told the committee, and she still spoke truth to power. So what does a 15th century Austrian woman and a black mother standing on a porch in Montgomery, Alabama, and a Gen Zer, a whistleblower, what do they all have in common? Well, one thing is they stood when it would have been easier to kneel or to run away. And the other thing is they spoke when silence would have been much easier. And they resisted. They resisted power, the power of the state, of communities, and of the church. People and institutions who told them to shut up and sit down. They carried an innate sense of dignity, and unshakable knowledge that they were not less. So they refused to be dehumanized. They held on to memory and witness, refusing to forget the wrongs they'd seen. And above all, they knew right from wrong. They drew strength from moral conviction, a belief in a higher justice no courtroom, no Congress, no church could erase. In essence, they believed in justice. They leaned on community and solidarity, knowing that even in lonely moments, they were not alone. It's clear to me they reached out. They armed themselves, each of them with education, awareness, and learning to see through the lies of power. And they used their tools, those tools that education provided them, for critical thinking. They nurtured an imagination of another world, daring to picture what freedom might look like. So you see, they had a story and a vision, and they believed in it. They endured steadfastly under all the terror. They stood firm against all the threats that were meant to break them. They had unbreakable conviction. And above all, they clung to truth as power, knowing that speaking it, even softly, was more dangerous to oppressors than silence. These are the unseen pillars of defiance, pillars as old as Helena's courtroom, as urgent as Coretta's bomb porch, and as modern as Cassidy's testimony under oath. But can these pillars crumble? What do you think? I'd love to hear your comments. Can the human will to resist falter under the weight of smothering power? I want to believe not. I want to believe there are always those who walk into rooms where they're not supposed to speak, and they speak anyway. That there are legacy builders strong enough to outlast the lies told in our time. That's what I believe. But history suggests that I might be wrong. History also finds exceptions. Ordinary people faced with extraordinary challenges that even in the darkest hours stand. Before we wrap up, I'd like to give you a little bit of a roadmap on where we're headed in the near term. In episode 8, we're going to drill down a bit, and I'm pulling a few threads of story, and we're going to examine Coretta Scott King's background in more detail. And I think you'll find that extremely interesting. And then in episode 9, I'm going to tell you a very personal story, something that has echoed all through my life. It was my first encounter with a black student by the name of Gregory James. In episode 10, we'll turn to literature, to Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, and to Percival Everett, the Pulitzer Prize winner for his book James. And we'll connect those two stories in episode 11 by discussing and going inside of a book called Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, a book that really changed my life and perspective. A woman who was capable, against the odds, of trying to understand the sources of our discontent. I find her story and her book amazing, and I hope you will too. And one last thing. If you enjoy this storytelling as much as I do creating the stories, I would hope you'd hit the subscribe button, because it helps me more than you know. And it keeps these stories alive at a time when I think they're relevant to all of us. So, having said that, as always, have a great day.